This is the Recovering Preacher's Kids podcast, where two sisters share their journey of growing up a preacher's kid and how the bumps in the road led them to the foot of the cross. Welcome back to another episode of the Recovering Preacher's Kids. We are doing New Year, New Beginning, and we have been talking about women in the Bible who had new beginnings. We don't know if it was a new year for them, but in my opinion, when you got a new beginning, it's a new year for you, sister. Okay. And this week, we're bringing you a lady that never gets talked about. We have focused on some pretty famous women. This woman, no, she's not talked about a lot. And she is none other than Deborah. And ashamedly, I have to tell y'all, I knew about this much, which is not much about Deborah. I knew she was a judge. And then I started doing the deep dive into who Deborah was. And y'all know I get it out of my trusty children's Bible, the one I study, my kids' Bible. And I love the way it kind of told Deborah's story. But Deborah comes on this scene in a time before the kings. There's no kings, and judges were chosen by God to lead the Israelites. It wasn't like a hereditary thing. You didn't get to be a judge because your daddy was a judge or your granddaddy was a judge. God appointed you. He chose you. And so there were several judges before Deborah. There was a guy that I'm going to say his name was Ehud. Doesn't mean that's the way you pronounce it, but that's what I'm going to say. And he led the Israelites to defeat the Moabites. And because of that, the Israelites enjoyed 80 years of rest. Can you imagine going 80 years and having no enemies? There's no enemies. And so, of course, after he died, Israel did what Israel does best. They rebelled. They began worshiping false gods. They just did everything God told them not to do. If God said go right, they went left, kind of like we do. And so their consequence was God handed them over to the Canaanites, and they were being led by a man named Jabin. He was the king of Canaan at the time, and they had oppressed Israel for 20 years. And that enters Deborah into the scene. And so she was a woman judge. She was the only woman judge. And so it says that she was known for her wisdom. And so there was something special about her. She was also a prophetess, which means that God spoke directly to her, and then she would speak to the people. And y'all, I did not know this about Deborah. Me and her are soul sisters because she listened to the disputes under none other than a palm tree. And I'm here to tell you, just sitting under a palm tree, not just solve every problem you have ever had in the whole entire world. And so I get Deborah. And so Deborah tells the leader of Israel at the time, his name was Barak, that, hey, we're fixing to go against the Canaanites. And he's like, I'm not going by myself. If I'm going to fight them, you going with me. And so Deborah said, okay. And so she goes with Barak and the army. And you have to understand that Jabin's army was led by a guy named Sisera. And he had 900 iron chariots. And so they had all the power.
See, that's like somebody with us going to war against somebody that had 900 tanks.
Exactly. I mean, they had all the stuff. And so you would think that, oh gosh, they're going to be afraid. And so God sends them up this mountain, and in a way that only God can do, God causes it to rain. The chariots get stuck in the mud and the mire, and the Israelites, they defeat the Canaanites, but Sisera runs away. And he goes to a tent of a woman named Jael. Is that how you say it?
Jael, I think that's right.
Jael? Y'all, listen to what Jael does. She is kind of friendly to him. She brings him in her tent. She kind of sits with him and listens to him, and she waits until he falls asleep. And y'all, she takes a tent stake and drives it through his head. She hit that thing so hard it went all the way through his head into the ground, like killed him.
I mean,
Killed him.
when we go camping and I have our little stakes that we use to put in little, they're not, but
Yeah.
but I mean, these had to be meaty, but still, you
Wooden.
taking a wooden stake and put it through the temple and you hit it so hard that it
It
goes
goes
into the
through his whole
ground.
head.
I mean, that's like, but
Mm.
it, yeah.
Woo.
Anyway,
And so, needless to say, the Canaanites were defeated to the point that they never oppressed Israel again. And so that's Judges chapter 4 is kind of the rise and what happens with Deborah. And then Judges chapter 5 is where Deborah and Barak sing a song. And that's kind of where they really break down the events of the fight with Canaan and just kind of her heart, because she talks about praising God. She talks about what God did for them. And I don't want to lose sight and kind of gloss over this either, is that when she told Barak they were going to go and he was like, well, I'm not going to go by myself. And she said, that's fine. I'll go with you. But you must understand, you will not get the praise for the win, because it's going to be because of a woman. And so there was a couple of things to unpack here, because, I mean, if this is not a story on HBO Max, I don't know what is, okay? Like, this is the story of all stories. But the things that jumped out to me about Deborah is, number one, she was married to a great man. The Bible tells us just very quickly, it just is like Deborah, the husband of
the wife.
Lapidoth. Yeah. Okay. I don't even know how to say his name. Y'all, I just make up the names. I don't really know. But he had to be a very strong man, and he had to be a very encouraging man, because it didn't say that he was a prophet and she was a prophetess. So he was married to a woman who God spoke directly to, and a woman who ended up being a woman of power, because she sat under the palm tree and heard everyone's disputes. And so I don't want to lose sight of how good her husband was and how important it is, if you are married, to have the support to support each other in that way. That jumped out at me. And the second thing that jumped out at me is that she didn't say no.
Oh.
And as a woman, there's so many times where I feel like God is telling me to do something. I shouldn't even say as a woman, but just as a person, I feel like God is telling me to do something, and then I want to say no. And I kind of want to applaud Deborah, because she did the hard thing, because she did the hard thing at a time where women weren't doing that.
Right.
And she just kind of rose to the occasion and followed God and walked with God and listened to God, and God spoke to her. And I'm like, wow.
Hmm.
And then the third thing that really jumped out at me was the fact that Jabin's army had 900 iron chariots, and all it took to defeat them was a little bit of rain. And I'm like, only my
My God.
living God can take down the biggest of giants with the smallest thing, like rain. And I think that that was such a fitting way for Deborah's story, because I think she was constantly kind of up against a giant, I guess you would say. In my mind, I would think it would have been very hard for her at times. But because she was obedient to God, God always took care of everything. He took care of everything, even through the rain, if that makes sense what I'm trying to
Yeah,
say.
it does. I'm reading a book. I thought I was going to jump up and go get it, but I decided not to leave you hanging, wondering where I was going. But I'm reading a book with Proverbs 31 Ministry. I can't think of the author right now, but tell you what, let me look it up quick, because she
And
unpacks the Proverbs, trust in the Lord with all your heart, not leaning on your all understanding. So this week we've been reading about not leaning on our own understanding.
Ooh.
That, you know, wisdom comes from God, and she used
Absolutely.
this idea of, to lean on something, you have to believe it's going to hold you up. And
Ooh.
leaning on ourselves, you can't stand up and lean on yourself. So what she was getting at, which is not coming up right now, but the name of the book is called Relax, Walking with the One Who is Not Worried About Anything. Okay. And so this week we've been talking about the whole idea of not leaning on your own understanding, because you can't stand up plus lean and hold yourself up at the same time. So the idea is you're to lean. Only God can carry you and hold you, and lead you in the direction. So as you were talking, that's what it reminded me of, about Deborah, as you were explaining the story, that for her to be so wise and God talked to her, she had a pretty special relationship with God.
Yes.
And she leaned on him, not herself, to lead the children of Israel, and then to go to Barak and say, okay, we're going to go to war and defeat Canaan, and not hesitate when he said, well, I'll go, but not without you. You have to go. That she had enough faith and she had walked with God enough that she wasn't worried about going. Because see, me, it would have been, okay, Lord, we're going to go. So can you tell me how you're going to do it? Because, you know what they have. They have the 900 chariots, and this guy, he doesn't lose anything. And, and I've got people here that just don't really, they have all kind of problems, and blah, 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 blah. Now, can you please lay it all out for me so I can understand how we're going to get from point A to point B? But Deborah doesn't do that.
Look, in 2013, there was this song that was released. I can't remember the name of it, and I don't know who sang it. But there was a line in it that said something about whatever will bring me closer to you. If that's what it'd take to bring me closer to you, then
The
let it
rain.
rain.
Let it rain.
The rain. Let it rain.
Mm.
Well, that became my prayer for 2013 is, God, just let it rain on me. Whatever it takes to draw me closer to you, let it rain. I'll withstand it. And then 2014 happened.
Mm-hmm.
And, in 2014, my daughter got married. My dad died, or our dad died. And then our mom went in the hospital, like literally the day
Before.
the day before our dad's funeral. And I remember sitting in the hallway of the hospital, and I said, this is not what I meant. This is not what I was referring to, Lord. Because at the time, come to find, our dad passed away from cancer, and our mom ended up having cancer. She actually had cancer at the exact same time, and by the time that she was diagnosed, she was stage 4. She did a trial, God healed her, and here we are 10 years later, and she's still with us. But it's like I can remember sitting in that hallway, and I was like, okay, God, I wasn't praying for this. This ain't the kind of rain I was talking about. And so as you were talking right then, I was thinking to myself, how many times do we say we're going to follow God? I'll follow you. I'll follow you into war. I'll follow you anywhere. But I need it to look like this, okay? And, and Deborah just went to battle. She just went to the war. She just said, okay, I'll go. And oh, hey, Barack, newsflash, you're not going to get the glory for it because a woman's going to end this, which was a disgrace at the time.
Right. And to think, I didn't mean to cut you off, but all these times that I've thought of Deborah, and when I was studying and preparing, and I saw that, I'm like, yeah, see, Deborah's she's going to win, just get the glory for it. And then it came from a woman named Jahel, which her name means mountain goat.
So she was a little bit of a wild woman, I do believe.
Don't we call that feral?
Feral. Okay. But let me ask you this. How many times how many times are we the ones that we go to battle, but somebody else gets the glory because they finished it? Maybe you did all the work, but God called this person to be the finisher, and you get mad because nobody saw all the work you did. Deborah
Are
didn't
you
do
reading my
that.
diary or something?
No, I'm reading mine.
I mean, because that's the way I feel sometimes. I'm like, see me? Hey, what is that little TikTok that you see that people doing all the time with Medea's voice and somebody else?
Like,
They'll
you
go,
see me,
you see
right?
me? I see you, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the way I feel sometimes. What, you don't see me? Do you not see what I'm going through? Do you not see what I've done and worked all this out? Now, but, yeah, so now this lesson, now how selfish was that?
But we all do it. We all do what we believe is the right thing to do. And I don't care. I'm a huge Friends fan. And I think about the time that Phoebe wanted to prove to Joey that there was such a good thing as a good deed. And he's like, no, it's not. And she lets a bee sting her. And she's like, I'll let a bee sting me. And he was like, well, the bee died. And so she was like, man, but it's like, it's the same thing, because it's like, maybe I have good intentions and I'm doing what I feel like God's calling me to do, but the flesh side of me still wants to get the praise for it. But maybe I'm not meant to get the praise for it. Maybe I'm meant to just level the playing field for someone else. And that's hard to accept.
That is very
It's
hard
hard
to
to accept that maybe I'm the Deborah. Maybe I'm the one that's just I'm not trying to say I'm the one that's talking to God. I didn't mean it that way, but maybe Deborah had to do everything she had to do to drive Sisera into Jahel's tent, is what I'm trying to say.
It wasn't
You
a planned
know,
out event. Yeah.
right.
Right. She didn't plan
Right.
that out. That wasn't in the strategic plan
Mm-mm.
for that to
But
happen.
because Deborah was obedient and listened to God, because God sees in million dimensional, she was obedient to everything he said every step along the way to get Sisera into her tent. And I am so guilty I'm like, okay, God, I'll follow you if I'm going to be the one that gets recognized in the end. And I'm not talking about getting recognized on a big stage, but just even from the aspect of, I see you.
Yeah. I
Does that
appreciate
make
what you
sense
did.
what I'm saying? I appreciate what you did. Yeah.
And I think that just comes from, and I guess everybody might struggle with it, but for me, and I don't want to blame it saying, oh, it's because I was a preacher's kid. But, growing up, there were so many times that it was like you were in the background and you were doing stuff behind the scenes, and, and there was, I don't know, and you weren't supposed to take any praise. So there were so many times I felt like I was standing there screaming, like, well, do you not see me? And to this day, it's something I still struggle with. It's just kind of like, what, you don't even, still don't see me to invite me to whatever? And that it's a very hard thing. And I haven't really thought about that in the study with Deborah, but yeah, she was the leader and she did, but she wasn't the finisher. Hill was the finisher.
And I'm going to tell you too, I was very convicted by her husband, because I find myself sometimes controlling what my husband does. Don't say that. Don't do that. Don't, and I don't think the Bible's silent about this, so just give me a little bit of freedom here. But do you think Deborah could have led the way that she did with the confidence that she had if everything she said and did, her husband was being like, don't be so harsh. Don't do this. Don't do that. And I just found myself convicted that I'm very, I critique my husband way too much. And I should be more encouraging, and I should be more uplifting and letting him just be him. Because what if her husband would have inserted himself over and over in her making the decisions with the people?
And what if he even said, no, you're not going to war with Barak?
Exactly.
You know?
So I think that men in our lives matter,
Yeah.
whether it's your husband or a friend or a brother or no matter who it is, it matters.
Matters. Yeah. I think that's what I got out of this too a lot was the fact that one for me it's the whole idea of being obedient and
Don't go
walk.
there. But we're not going to talk about, don't go there about being obedient, okay?
I
I'm just
just step
kidding.
on something. But being willing to do whatever God told you to, the task He has for you, and not leaning on my own understanding on how I'm going to get there. Just
Yeah.
start. Just take that first step, and two, being that encourager. I mean, like you were talking about her husband. I mean, I think that's like, I don't think you have to just be a woman to take things away from this on Deborah. I mean, I think you can be a man, because I think sometimes, I don't know. I think we have, as women, is yet again, I guess, see us, that we
Mm-hmm.
haven't allowed, sometimes we push the men away and don't include them. So it's important for them to rise up too and lead and be willing to do whatever God. And it might not be their time to shine, but there might be a time to shine, if that makes sense. And I think it was a lesson that we should be working together.
Yes.
Together.
Be- because at the end of the day, when they went to battle, Deborah and Barak worked together. There was a bit of teammate there. I don't
Yeah.
think that's the right word,
But
but
still,
I
I
don't
mean,
know,
camaraderie, is
you
that the right
know.
word?
Yeah. And so they work together. And I think that there's so many times when I'm working alongside a man, not just my husband, but say I'm serving in church and it's a group and maybe there's a man in the group or whatever. And I'm like, why are they annoying? Why are you not doing it my way? Like, my way is better. Just listen. Okay. I'm just being honest right now.
Well, yeah,
And
I understand. I get
and
that.
it's so hard even in my job. In my job I get extremely frustrated sometimes because I will there will be men who will give direction and then I'm thinking that's dumb. And at the end of the day, the point I'm trying to make is that Deborah has shown me that people matter.
Oh,
And
that's a
she
good point.
surrounded herself with good people, men and women, okay? Because first and foremost, now I don't know if she knew Jahel before this, don't know. But if she did or she didn't, I mean, she was still surrounded by her, whether she knew it or not. God had her there. She was surrounded by her husband. She was surrounded by Barak. She was surrounded by people that mattered and people who encouraged her, spoke life into her, and held her accountable
Mm-hmm.
and encouraged her. And I don't do those things well because if I hold you accountable, you might get mad at me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's me. I don't want that.
So
Yeah. I don't want you mad at
I,
me.
I, I don't want you mad at me. And so I struggle with holding people accountable. But think of how many times Deborah sat under that palm tree holding people accountable
Mm, mm,
as
mm.
iron sharpens iron. And
That's
so
interesting.
she was very wise. The Bible tells us she was wise. And so think of the cases that came before her and the times that she had to hold people accountable in a way that probably was very uncomfortable. She
Hmm.
didn't like it.
And so I was just sitting here thinking, from that, based on her actions and how she judged and made decisions and how she led, developed her character and her reputation, for Barak to say, okay, we'll go, but I'm not going without you. So,
Oh,
he had to have known what kind of character Deborah had. And like I said, this could go for either sex. I mean, I don't want to
Yeah.
sound like we're only talking to women here, because I think it's also a lesson to men, because it's a question of what are our actions, our reputation going for? Are people going to follow us as we're leading and doing whatever God's saying, because they can trust us based on our walk matches what we say? And that just stepped on my toes.
And she had to have been I guess her actions had to go before her before God called her to be the judge.
Yes. Yes.
She had a good reputation because the Bible doesn't say that the people threw a fit when God appointed her judge and said, "Oh, we're not going to before Deborah." God, because look, the Israelites, if they have done one thing, they have proven over and over that if they did not like what God said, they were not silent. They had a lot to say about it. So her reputation preceded her. How she lived her life preceded her before God called her. Ooh, that just got me. Not that we have to be ashamed of our past. I'm not saying she was a perfect woman, but there was something about her that people were like, I understand. I can go before her. She's fair. She's going to be fair. She's going to speak truth. She's going to follow what God says. She's not going to sugarcoat it. You know, if I take my case up against her and she says I'm wrong, then I can trust that I was wrong.
Oh, that's an interesting point, because I'm going to sit there and explain to you why I'm right.
Oh, 1,000%.
I can't be wrong.
Don't make me turn into a lawyer, okay? I told somebody the other day at work, I said, the thing people forget of even like lawyers in our office, I said, what they forget is we have worked with them all for so long. Secretaries can quickly become a lawyer in a heartbeat if we need to. And look, that didn't happen just now. People did it back then too.
Right. That's very interesting.
It's not just a new trait. I don't know. Deborah has really got me, and I'm glad we added her to the list. I'm not going to lie. I kind of rolled my eyes, and I was like, oh my gosh, how does she fit in the new beginning? But you were like, no, I want to do Deborah. And I thought, okay.
But I have to be honest, the whole reason I wanted to do Deborah was a very selfish point. I mean, I went into this with a preconceived idea of what I wanted to say as far as women leaders. Okay, let's just be honest here. I was going to use it as a soapbox that I was going to stand on, and that is so not what I got out of Deborah. And I mean,
God is cool.
I mean, he like whipped up on me on this one. I mean, he didn't rise her up to be a leader because she thought, well, I'm a woman and I deserve to be, you know. And it all came back to her relationship with with God, and willingness to walk with him, and willing to lead and do the hard things without having the plan.
You just hit the nail on the head, because it is about the relationship and the trust, like to not have the plan.
But not
I'm this year, my word is trust. And every day I'm just constantly like, God, I'm going to trust you no matter what. No matter what happens today, I'm going to trust you. I want to be the kind of believer that trusts God. And I can trust God with the big things. It's just I don't trust God with the little things.
Yeah. Well, I always say, okay, I trust you, but let me tell you how I think this needs to work, and how I think you can make it all work out and everybody be happy and everything be hunky-dory.
Well, let me clarify what I consider big things. My salvation and my salvation. Okay? I will take care of everything else, God, but I appreciate my eternal salvation. And I'm having to say, no, God, you didn't create me to worry about any of this and to manipulate. And Deborah taught me, Deborah didn't manipulate anything. And when you read her song, and I encourage you to open up Judges chapter 5 and read her song, because it really is such a beautiful, she uses just beautiful words to show what happened. And her anthem of celebration, I guess, is really what it is. And she should celebrate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not because she was victorious and she did anything, because all she does in chapter 5 is brag on God.
That's what I was fixing to say. She didn't take any of the credit. She totally gave God the credit. And listening to you talk about trusting God with the big things, but not the little things, is exactly what is I'm reading in this book of Relaxed. Is that is not what we're designed for? To say, okay, God, I can take care of everything, which
Mm-hmm.
leads to the anxiety and and it just is a snowball, and because that's leaning on your own understanding and your own
Mm-hmm.
knowledge. So not only did I get whipped up from Deborah this week as we studied, I got smacked on the other side of the face with reading this book.
Well, I recently read an article and it was talking about Charles Spurgeon.
Mm.
And that when he was a young pastor, he, I think it was Charles Spurgeon. It was either C.S. Lewis or Charles Spurgeon. I don't want to say the wrong name, but I really think it was Charles Spurgeon. But that he was a young pastor of like 18 years old, and he had preached one Sunday and had, knocked it out of the park. And multiple people, I want to say how the story went, had told him what a great job he did. And he went home, and that night he knelt beside his bed and he put his hands on his head as if he were removing an invisible crown. And he laid it on the floor and he said, Jesus, I'm laying this crown at your feet today for what you did.
Oh, wow.
And I kind of feel like that maybe that's what Deborah did. Is Deborah was such a humble woman. She was a warrior. She was courageous. She was strong. But she knew how to take the invisible crown off her head and just lay it at the feet and say, this victory was yours. This was yours. And that's where I want to be.
Us women are fixers, or I'm a fixer.
Absolutely.
I'm just come to me and let me fix it. And that's not what she has done. That was another lesson.
No.
She had to solve resolutions. I'm not sure. I think she just, she listened and made her decision, but she didn't fix the problem. She just said,
No.
this is the way it's going to be, and that's just the kind of hard thing. I just lost my train of thought, but realizing that Deborah wasn't a fixer, she just trusted and walked.
She did not insert herself.
Okay, you need to stop.
She didn't insert herself. I see that. And, she didn't run into Jahel's tent and do the deed. Jahel did it, And so maybe at the end of the day, men, women alike, maybe God's calling us to just not run in the tent and us just listen, be patient, and trust that his way is the better way, and stop trying to control it. Just sit under the palm tree.